Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. We are back from our summer break with this episode number 131 with Eric Gibbs from Ouriginal. We are going to deep dive an area we haven't explored on the podcast before, but really relevant and very important. That being academic integrity and the tools and approaches we use to support that with students to make sure that they understand what they should and shouldn't be doing. So I found this conversation fascinating. Eric talks about it, I think, in a very understandable way and a way that is very educational with students and isn't overly sort of punitive with them. So really appreciated the time with Eric and all that he shared, some great resources as well. So definitely connect with him, the work that his team is doing and all that he mentioned. Appreciate you listening. Always a quick note, check out our merch store. We've got great stuff on there. There's always sales going on. Link is in the description of this episode. And always appreciate everyone's support and your time listening to this episode. This is episode number 131 with Eric Gibbs. Well, I'm excited here. This episode being as we're getting back from summer break, academic year starting, a lot to talk about, but really excited to explore an area that, as we have been this year. Obviously, there's so many different kind of facets and nuances of higher education technology, and now kind of getting into academic integrity and the tools that we use to try to help support that in kind of the higher ed space. So we will start out as we always do. Eric, if you want to just intro yourself briefly and kind of go over your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dustin, for having me. So just a little bit about myself. I'm first generation college graduate. Spent now just a little over 20 years in the ed tech market experience. I always like to say I've had my fair share of the obstacles, setbacks, and failures, layoffs, terminations, etc. But I always like to say with those experiences come really the ability to understand the adversity growth and ability to humanize the obstacles and turn those into successes. So my first really true exposure to the ed tech industry was a startup based in the Bay Area called Applia. Applia was led by a Stanford University economist, Nobel laureate. And this opportunity has really kind of stayed with me. So Applia enabled me to meet what became my mentor, Sally Elliott, and led me for the 14 years to work with her at Thompson Learning, which became Cengage, Turnitin. And now, today, I'm president of Americas at Ouriginal, which is a tech similarity detection and academic integrity company, which I helped launch the North American operation to expand their reach and presence from the Europe and Nordics.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Like I think most people maybe are familiar with Turnitin, but I think I guess maybe I'm not sure like if they're like global as well, but I think just like that caught my eye of like, oh wow, okay, yeah, this is something that's maybe on a different scale or coming from a very different perspective or just culture, I guess. But if you want to just, I guess, also just lay the groundwork though, just so that people kind of have the full context, like explain a little bit about what Ouriginal does.
Absolutely. So Ouriginal is a set of kind of online academic integrity tools and services that are primarily utilized by secondary, post-secondary, and corporations. And it really is to assist ensuring originality and authenticity of written work. The company was launched in September of 2020. And it was really when two European tech similarity detection leaders, Erkin from Sweden and PlagScan from Germany, came together and combined now with over 3 decades of knowledge and experience when we launched the Ouriginal brand. So as you said, most individuals are familiar with Turnitin. It's tech similarity detection, and I don't use the words plagiarism detection. I think that's a misnomer in the market. There's no such thing as plagiarism detection. So no software or tool can actually detect plagiarism. I think that's probably the biggest thing and takeaway from any of your listeners today, that no detection of plagiarism can be automatically done. We do need individual professors, evaluators to be able to see what the text is being matched to and then make that evaluation. So the Ouriginal provides services to to be able to match text to a vast amount of internet content, scholarly journals and academic resources, and then student content from over 20 years to be able to provide then to an evaluator to actually make an educated decision whether that content then has been plagiarized.
Yeah, I was just listening to another random podcast, and that kind of makes me think of like, because because sometimes it's like if somebody's being hesitant about like, oh, we have data and like we're being like data driven, like some people are like hesitant because like, okay, well, is the data making the decisions? It's like, no, human beings are like, we are data informed, practitioners, faculty, and whomever that, like you said, are equipped with this information to say like, oh, okay, well, I see what this was sort of pulling up, and maybe that's not a concern, or this is something that we need to uh, you know pursue further and all that. So yeah, because I always think just like there needs to be that human element for sure, just to moderate
Yeah,
things or just sort of
and one other thing, Dustin, I think the thing is the human element doesn't necessarily have to be the bad guy. You can also empathize with students, and it can be a teaching and learning moment on how to properly cite the reference. It can be a teaching and learning moment to be able to have the conversation of maybe you shouldn't copy directly from a website. Have that empathy with the student. I mean, if you take from what happened last year, pushing and forcing students directly to an online and remote learning, you have to have some type of empathy with the student. It's a good way to have a bond with your end learner, right? So this is a good way to have that empathy and the teachable moment with the end user here.
yeah, absolutely, because I think that it's just one of those trend lines that you can see of like, oh, okay, students seem to be like earnestly confused. Like they were not trying to kind of, plagiarize, pull one over on their professor. They just didn't understand what they were doing was wrong. So, it's operating with that empathy and also saying like, can we do something to help, reinforce these concepts about, citing things and all that. But, yeah, so I don't, you mentioned obviously being in this space for a long time. These things are kind of, troubles that are as old as time, kind of thing, of just needing to work with students on proper etiquette around citing and doing research papers and everything. But just broadly, over these past decades, how do you feel like online learning has impacted academic integrity? And then we'll focus in a bit more on, obviously like the work that you all been doing over this past year.
Yeah, Dustin, I think so. I think if we start talking about academic integrity, it's always good to set the stage from a benchmark perspective. What is the issue? What is the problem? I always like to kind of talk about the most well-known study talking about referring to academic integrity, and I think we would have to go back looking at the late Dr. Don McCabe and the International Center for Academic Integrity. They conducted a study with surveying university students from the fall of 2002 to the spring of 2015. And what they wanted to look at was the number of university students who admitted cheating in some form. And cheating could actually take the actual form of percent of who admitted cheating on test. It could be on written assignments, and then quantifying it in written assignments or cheating. And the sample size was quite large. So if we look at undergraduate students, it was about 71,000 students. And the percent of it who admitted cheating on a test was roughly 39%. The percent who admitted cheating on written assignments, so this is something that's similar to an original or a Turnitin or anti-plagiarism solution could actually deter or assist with, was 62%. And then if you quantified the number of total who admitted on written or test cheating, was 68%. So what you could see is, cheating is pretty common in education. It's changed over the years, both in character and body. But cheating also refers not only to the appearance and form of cheating, but also in the perceptions of cheating. I like to reference research that was done by University of California, San Diego professor Tricia Bertram Galland. She recognizes that the changes in the educational system, not only both society and technology, changes over time, but also the opportunities and temptations to cheat. So you see that it's very easy for students to go out to the internet, go out, Control C, Control V directly from Wikipedia or a specific website, and go in and actually then copy that and paste that into their paper. And you start listening to focus groups. You start looking at the research, and time constraints. Student behavior is very, very, very predictable. Time constraints is typically the number one issue. Your papers due at 11:45. Typically, you see, you can go to your learning management system and see when students are actually submitting. It's going to be about 11:30, right? We all know that predictability. But I think there's also some motivators here that are not in the students' favor. We tell the students what they can't do, right? Don't plagiarize. Don't do this. Don't do that. Instead of providing kind of an integrity approach of offering teachable moments, like I talked about earlier, kind of moments of real world guidelines for students on why they should be moral and ethical, kind of an ethical primer. So I think it's just kind of incentives should actually be realigned. And we can actually provide those with some resources from some quality resources from the International Center for Academic Integrity. So I think, step back just a little and you look at what the research tells us, you look at the studies, again, prior to COVID or prior to this global pandemic, and they're quite staggering, Dustin.
Yeah. Well, and I guess just really quick is sort of like a yes or no, because I imagine this is the case, or I feel like I've maybe heard it. And the idea of like online learning, you said like, students cheating, has been around, it's just changed its shape. Do you encounter people a lot in your work that think that cheating has like dramatically increased with the advent of online learning?
That's the $1 million question, right? So you will have proponents that will say yes, it has, but I think that what the research will tell you is that there's no the we see just as many matches in online as traditional face to face, right? What I'd like to deflect, if you will, this is going to be a deflection question or response. So I apologize to your listeners. What I will say is that what we have started to see, and if you would have looked at the proceedings from the International Center of Academic Integrity's conference from earlier this year, what you would start to notice is a lot of trends and a lot of talk about these academic file sharing sites and what I actually call the digital sharing economy. Mm-hmm. And these academic file sharing sites pose a real risk to academic integrity. There's no easy solution to file sharing sites, but it's imperative for the educational community, and I'll also say parents, to know that these sites exist. So what are these? These basically are kind of the Napster of academia. I mean, it's basically going out. Tests are being shared on these. You can actually go out and buy an essay, buy a homework solution. But unfortunately, we find ourselves in a kind of a whack-a-mole type of scenario. When one gets down or taken down, and or exposed, another one pops up. And I feel parents, and I have a son that's going into his junior year in high school, and we have these conversations quite frequently. But I feel parents, schools, and university administrators kind of need to be more familiar with these unauthorized use of what teachers and professors' course content basically being, I won't being said stolen, but their IP is essentially being utilized in a way that's not fair. So basically, you have quiz, lab manuals, essays, exams out there that are in circulation today, and students are going out there and purchasing them and utilizing them. And it's just a different way. It's a different way that causes some real concern on the academic integrity side. But I want to pause here because I think I want to make sure that we're not confusing student collaboration or group work, which I think we would all agree, should be encouraged within an educational setting. But where it crosses its line, where we cross the line, is where artifacts are being shared by students when in fact the files, or the artifacts as I'm calling them, are owned by the instructor, or potentially a university like in the UK or in Australia. So we don't want to normalize the behaviors that are currently trending with these file sharing sites, or fall prey to their marketing message of, studying smarter. Is it studying smarter, or should you be able to complete a complete a homework in 30 seconds on Canvas or Moodle or Brightspace, right? As an instructor, if I'm seeing trends of being able to complete that in 30 seconds when I know it's going to take me at least 45 minutes an hour, that's a pretty disturbing trend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And I think it's like, unfortunately to see, and this is like like big existential question. I don't have any idea what the answer is, but like, students who know that like, okay, this credential that I'm pursuing is, part of the solutions, kind of the key that will at least open the door towards better opportunities and jobs and all that. So they're kind of just trying to like go through and check all the boxes and everything. So it's kind of like, like you said, like kind of hitting on maybe more of that emotional piece or something, or sort of, creating that culture of having that internal motivator to understand why academic integrity is important, and just sort of, those sort of things. Cause I think like, that check will come due eventually, either literally or figuratively or whatever. But like, if you're just breezing through, and using these artifacts and, yeah, getting things done and not actually like learning and solidifying, the learning, then it's like, okay, well then you get a job and then you're like not good at it, or so, you're like, you just don't know your stuff. So
Dustin, you're hitting right on. You're hitting on. I mean, you're on it. I mean, there's an urgency to solve this issue. I mean, we're hearing this from employers that state institutions are granting degrees, right? That students don't have those basic skills that are needed to function, and in business, marketing, or I guess it's more non-specialized jobs, right? Now, I think we've heard this over and over and over the years. But do we need to move to more of a skills-based model that matches the needs of the employer with the outcome skills, certified, granted by the institution? I think that's a different question. But at the end of the day, if a student or a learner is not doing this and granting getting the competency of this basic assignment, right? This builds on itself. If it goes back to the integrity of the assignment, the integrity of the degree, that it is concerning, and we have a bigger issue that we have that we're building upon in this conversation that we're not going to be able to solve today, right?
right.
But it starts. You start having that conversation. And yes, we do need to be more cognizant of this digital sharing economy, because it does cause problems in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just the idea, like the work that you all are doing and everything, supporting institutions and, the students' learning experience and everything. It's kind of like, my mind always thinks of like, these sort of visual metaphors, whatever. Like, it's like you're just trying to kind of prune and like keep things sort of in check. Cause like you said, it's like always kind of like, going to be sort of, whack-a-mole and everything. But, catching it when you can, having those educational conversations, trying to like get ahead of it in terms of things that you might put into like an orientation experience, or
Yes.
articulating in the beginning of courses and things. So yeah, it's like, it's a good fight, kind of keep fighting the good fight, because I think we're really nearing some like existential dread of just like, oh my god, I don't know, like what do we do?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of culture shifts, and I think, really making intentional moves towards like wanting to kind of facilitate that culture of honoring, the importance and the integrity of, you know, learning honestly and all of that. So I think, because you mentioned too, like some of it's like, it may be acts of maybe like desperation on students due to like time constraints or something. So just to kind of honor like the moment we're in, because maybe we did see any kind of marginal uptick or anything over this past year, because obviously people were kind of coping with a lot. Like, what have you seen maybe as the impact of any, of the disruptions brought on by the pandemic over this past year plus?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the certainly from I think maybe I'll answer this as a two-pronged response here.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic certainly from a technology perspective, internal. It was from a load and technology perspective. I always like to say it was very, very good from a business perspective. The real heroes internally at the company were the technology folks, right? Because they were the ones that had to see, the 15, 20, 25 times load that the students were submitting to the papers. It was an all-time high, right? It's if companies were not doing load testing, they were able now to actually to actually realize real-time load testing in 2020. So the technology folks, kudos to every single ed tech out there for being able to actually support the widespread and large load that was happening in 2020. From a pandemic perspective, I think it was really, I think we're going to have to look back and do some type of quality control, because when March and April came around, it was pretty much a forced remote and online learning. I think every ed tech over, the last 20 years or 18 years, 15 years, we were trying to get individuals to buy into, quote, e-learning, online learning, move from hybrid, get individuals to embrace what tools we knew could enhance the online experience. And we got it in a matter of 30 to 60 days. But it wasn't good pedagogical tools, right? It was a face on Zoom or a Hangout. And now we're having to go back and make it a good pedagogical experience for all learners. For an original, it was a needed tool or a Turnitin or a plagiarism prevention tool. You needed an academic integrity tool. You had to have that type of quality assurance or a compliance tool, because how were you going to guarantee, or how were you going to ensure that a student wasn't going to plagiarize, or a learner wasn't going to plagiarize, or a researcher wasn't going to utilize it in ways that needed to be deterred? So our type of product was something that was it went from a nice to have maybe to a need to have. So it was very good for our tools. Where we started hearing even prior to the global pandemic was this idea of authorship recognition tools. And what we started implementing early this year in March was the ability to identify writing patterns and authenticity of a learner's submission. So what I mean by that, Dustin, is being able to take a submission from a written artifact and compare it from a previous artifact, and then compare it with a high degree of confidence if that artifact was then indeed written by that same submitter from the prior submission. And so that's the type of tools, kind of stylometry writing analysis that we're moving forward with, based upon market feedback from not only institutions, but kind of accrediting bodies, state bodies, et cetera. So you're starting to see trends come out of the kind of needs assessment from institutions based upon what the market was forced to do, and now kind of requirements from institutions moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny how it seems like there's a lot of catching up to do over this past year. Everybody's sort of has been kind of catching up, and there might still be some stragglers, and certainly there's going to be some people that were kind of far ahead of the pack. But like you're saying, it's kind of now where it's like you're seeing things that have been around for a long time now starting to evolve, because now it's just kind of like there's a baseline of ubiquity of something like a Turnitin, which kind of just kind of dumps out where it's like, oh, this is just like this thing out on the internet. And that's like what you're kind of telling me. I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, that's so smart. Like the idea of is this thing like the thing I wrote last week? I write the same way. Like I have a style of writing. Everybody kind of does, so it's like almost that same idea of it makes me think of if people forge documents, you can kind of be like, oh, this isn't like their usual penmanship, they always do their T's a certain way, yeah, that's really smart.
I always like to equate it. It's kind of like the way that we talk about this, it's modernizing your academic integrity policy, right? It's basically taking and optimizing the tools that have been around forever. And that's really kind of the approach that we're taking. It does, I don't want us to be the plagiarism police, because the best thing that I was able to engage with an individual learner on Twitter, that's the best way to understand what your user base is. You see students completely freaking out, and they say, "Oh my gosh, my original score was 62%. I don't understand how I plagiarized 62%." And I can engage with that literally engage with that individual student and say, it doesn't mean you plagiarized. And to again go back to that empathy, I feel completely horrible that student thinks that they plagiarized 62%, because at the end of the day, that individual instructor did not convey that it's a text similarity, right? That's in our conversation and with the individual instructor. We want to convey that it literally is not plagiarism detection. So I can actually go out and have that conversation with the direct student to try to keep them at ease, to make sure that they know that, yes, don't feel like you failed, because in a personal statement, or if they're doing, a narrative, that's the worst thing that you can do, right? So, engage with that individual learner and be able to say, no, don't worry about it. Great job. Keep it up. But, maybe just try to look at the citations and know that, yes, if you're if you're quoting Shakespeare and at writing a paper on Shakespeare, you're probably going to have a pretty high similarity score, because there's not much you can do on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I guess then, you're sort of alluding to a lot of this. So I don't know if you want to put sort of any sort of buttons on anything or anything else that comes to mind, because, I guess I originally framed this question of like navigating this new normal, but it's like part of it's the way it's always been, but just sort of maybe more of it. But I mean, yeah, just any advice they would give for higher ed pros, faculty, those folks out there that are just kind of, navigating these kind of conversations with students and utilization of the tools and those sort of things. Any advice that you would give?
Yeah, well, first, Dustin, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna, I'm acknowledge that even the pros that we're, navigating in uncharted water, uncharted waters coming off of the global pandemic. But whether it's the global pandemic changing higher education landscape, respect to, I think online or traditional on campus classes challenges. Um, I think it's natural and it's pertinent that things are going to evolve. I just, I just read a book by Sarah Eaton from she's an associate professor at the University of Calgary that I'd highly recommend. It's Plagiarism in Higher Education, Tackling Tough Topics in Academic Integrity. Highly recommend that. It kind of touches on several of the topics that we've discussed. Why do students plagiarize? Why don't faculty always report it? What if researchers themselves play? It was just very well written at a very high level, and then kind of digs into places where I think across the campus, it would be approachable. But I think the one thing I always point back to is the International Center for Academic Integrity does a very, very good job of kind of thinking about, from a higher education perspective, breaking it down, a reference of basically the 6 fundamental values, which are honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. And, at the end of the day, academic integrity is going to come back that the students sitting in our home schools, high schools, colleges, graduate schools will someday be a member of the global workforce. And so this is where, I always have this conversation with my son. I'm hopeful that kind of those 6 fundamental values can be put to practice early in their education, kind of to ensure that we are better off, later as a global economy. So that's kind of always kind of the focus that I take on this. And if anybody ever has any, reference or want to have any information from those organizations, it's just academicintegrity.org for the International Center for Academic Integrity. And for any of your European listeners, for the European Network for Academic Integrity, it's just academicintegrity.eu.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean that was definitely a resource I wanted to connect out to, and I appreciate you sharing some of the other stuff as well. But yeah, I mean, any other like resources, books, podcast articles, anything else that you'd want to mention, just so we could flesh out the show notes for this episode?
Yeah, the only other one I would say is Dr. Thomas Lancaster has been talking about contract cheating, since 2008, and I've really pushed the digital sharing economy, and I can't overstate how much of an issue the academic file sharing sites are to higher education, to K-12, to all of academic integrity. Um, anything that he reports on or publishes, I think is of utmost importance. And I think, again, just the more you can inform your students on how much of an issue academic integrity file sharing sites are, I would highly recommend, even calling them out that these tools are not permitted in higher education, even in your syllabus. It just is going to protect the integrity of the institution.
Yeah, and I mean, that feels like a great place to end. But I do always like any other like final thought or call to action, because I think like yeah, I mean that's really the crux of it, is like calling it out, acknowledging why it's wrong, setting clear kind of expectations and consequences. Because I think like a lot of this makes me think of, and I'm sure it's there's very similar kind of like, I don't know if there's like a legal basis to all this, but like, just sort of like copyright infringement, like fair use of things, like images online and all that, where like, people can't earnestly, again, just be like, oh, I didn't know it wasn't right to share out the, exam questions. Like,
Right.
The professor shared them all with us. Like, and it's like, I just put them, like, and again, and sometimes you call it out, and somebody's like, "Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense." They don't like probably resist it very heavily for very long. Like if you kind of again call it out and really just be like, did the professor say that you could put it up there? Like, well, they did say that we couldn't or something. Like, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's one of those things like you kind of shine a light on it, and I think that is a really big important first step. So I guess anything else, because I think some people might say like, oh, that feels sort of like easier said than done, like I don't even know maybe like where to start with that. I mean, like you mentioned, like putting it into syllabuses, but anything else maybe that you've seen just as sort of like broader strategies of how to maybe kind of get started, at least again kind of shining that light on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that institutions will put the student in the middle of the, at the forefront and in the middle of the conversation. It's got to be a grassroots effort. It can't be a top-down approach. Again, I think that is where academic integrity policies has been in the past. It's been, here's what you can't do and here's why. That does work. Let's not, I don't think I want to sit here or engage in that conversation and try to defend it. But I think if you have that conversation, if we embrace the conversation around why we should have focus groups on campus, engage with your students. If the provost, if the president, and a subset of individuals could talk about the practices that are going on in campus, I think that's a great way to start the conversation, because I think that the faculty, as well as that individual at the top, is going to have a very big eye opener. I know I did. I've participated in 3 focus groups this spring, and believe it, my eyes were rolling in the back of my head when you hear what type of practices are going on in campus. It's shocking. But I think the first step is the acknowledgement and listening, right? The second step is to engage the students. The third step is really that full disclosure. So here's what is available. Here's as far as kind of on campus. Here's what's not permitted. And I think if we have that full disclosure, right? If we have that full disclosure, if we have the deterrence such as a Turnitin, anti-plagiarism, an original, if you have those deterrents, that's one small part of the overall strategy. That modernization that I talked about is, good course design. You can't just expect students to change a couple of questions, and you're going to get, the students aren't going to try to game the system. Good course design has to be a part of the overall strategy. So I think it's a multifaceted approach to modernizing your academic integrity strategy. And with a few, again, with a few steps, we can try to kind of put the foundation together. And Original would love to be a part of that conversation. You can always go to original.com. That's OURIGINAL.com. And eric.gibbs@original.com. I would love to be able to connect you with researchers in the field. And again, probably the best resource you can reach out to is the International Center for Academic Integrity.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah, and we'll definitely have ways to connect with you and your team and the work that you're all are doing. And yeah, I mean, it makes me think, I think to sort of like connect dots too for some folks. Like this is kind of the same practices that you should be thinking about with like digital literacy and like social media, etiquette and those sort of things where it's like oftentimes, again, yeah, it's somebody kind of, high up in an organization kind of wagging the finger and saying like, no, like you can't do these things. And it's like, yes, again, like you said, that is very important,
Yeah.
set proper role expectations, but also say like, here's how you can like, exist on social media in a way that is proper and, you can network and grow and build communities and like all of that. Like you can kind of model the way and literally kind of help instruct people in proper behavior versus simply only, saying what somebody can't do. But even then, like that's enough of a place to start is like getting started and saying like, hey, these are the things that aren't allowed. So you're starting to really sort of clear out that ambiguity and just help students, make smarter decisions that are, kind of in line with academic integrity and everything. So I think, it's just time well spent, and I think can align with other sort of outreach and engagement and learning that you should be doing with your students. So thank you so much, Eric, for hanging out and sharing all that you did, and taking some time out for the podcast is really great stuff. And again, just a conversation that we haven't really had on the podcast yet. So I'm just very grateful for it. So yeah, just thanks again for jumping on.
Yeah, Dustin, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your listeners' time as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.